Good evening again, and welcome everyone back to fractalu.com for 2018. Are we glad that we're back with you and that the Fractal University Online is back alive and well and kicking? And if we got exciting science, spiritual science, breakthrough fractal field science for you tonight. So tonight we're going to do a gentle intro. When we publish the sort of physics outline for tonight, at fractalu.com on top, we got some feedback that says, well, what does this mean for the average person in simple terms? The fractal field basic physics. What are the implications for us in practical terms? So we're going to do some of that first, and then we're going to introduce the sort of science section here as the center of the sandwich. And then at the end, we go back to the interpretation. And some of this tonight will be an introduction for the real breakthrough physics next week, as Mark Rohrbaugh, who's with us tonight, will be presenting, and will be including our latest work, connecting his work on the proton to electron mass ratios and those things, showing that implosive charge collapse, fractal conjugate implosive charge collapse, not only does it predict the proton electron mass and all the good things that Mark's been working on lately, but it actually describes the cause of gravity. The implosive charge collapse is the reason gravity exists. And that's exciting because it helps us understand centripetal forces in a fundamental way. And that's what our introduction tonight is about. So for the introduction, if you want to kind of read along, I will be talking about what we call the big picture, which is at the top of fractalu.com. And that's how we're going to start, with a gentle introduction before we get into the science part of tonight. So, in other words, supposing you're not a scientist, you're not a physicist, but you're excited about fractal field physics, and you really want to be able to talk intelligently about what the implications are. And so we're going to do that kind of gentle psychological introduction tonight as a way to make it more fun to talk about the science in the center of tonight's sandwich, so to speak. So what are the implications? Well, first, we said that fractality defined couldn't be simpler. The universe is simply made of rotating compressible waves of charge. That compressible wave of charge, when it's compression versus rarefaction, is called plus or minus charge, and that is what is meant by the ether. So the universe is comprised of a single contiguous compressible media. We call it charge, and that's what the ether is. And when that charge rotates, it stores inertia, which we name mass. And when that charge rotates, it creates a period of rotation, which is the name for time. So instead of calling it a space-time continuum, it is simply a continuum of rotating charge. And when those patterns of rotating charge become rose-like or fractal, or nested like the dodecaecosa nest, which we're going to show later is the electron shells, and when those charge rotation patterns nest like a rose or a fractal, they become implosive, and the charge is accelerated towards center because of what's called phase conjugation, namely waves that conjugate by adding and multiplying by golden ratio. And that creates acceleration of charge towards center, which is named the gravity, because some of the charge that's rotating is accelerated as it moves out through the Planck dimension at center. And we have animations of that. And we're saying that the way that happens is the charge enters as a transverse up and down wave, and it goes down a spiral on the cone called phase conjugation, looks like the caduceus. And when it emerges, what entered as a transverse up and down electromagnetic, which is all of our communication, suddenly comes out the end, the tip of the pine cone, exactly at the Planck dimension threshold, and has been then accelerated into the longitudinal compressional, sometimes called scalar wave, which is demonstrably proven to be faster than light. And that's what creates the possibility of action at a distance, which Einstein called spooky because he couldn't conceive of what was faster than light. And it creates embedding in this longitudinal or scalar wave mechanics, which is the mechanism of all spiritual science, all the collective unconscious story, all the stories about spiritual events, action at a distance. When Ingo Swann heated a thermistor at a distance with his mind through a Faraday cage repeatedly in a laboratory, all this stuff, it's because he made longitudinal waves. So it's very important that we understand this, because where magnetic lines cross, the only place you can put sacred space and Gothic cathedrals and Druid phone calls and cozy rev mirrors is where these magnetic lines cross, because you embed in this longitudinal stuff. And where the pine cones cross perfectly, called four-wave mixing, phase conjugation, is what enables this embedding in longitudinal. And this is not just a theory, this is not just abstract, this is the best place to make a Druid phone call for birth or death or sacred space, because embed in this wave mechanics, which is the radio of DNA and the radio of the collective unconscious and the radio of ancestral memory. And this is very hard to do electrically, of course, in metal buildings and electrosmog and all this stuff. So we're going to connect this science of how this fractal conjugate wave mechanics embeds in these faster than light longitudinal waves to practical instructions for the hygiene. That's where we're making this connection. So, and in this introduction, we said further, we spoke about the fact that religion has done a pretty terrible job of producing agreement about these things. So if we can talk about all of this spiritual kind of phenomena with a solid and practical science, suddenly we can produce agreement and reduce religion wars, obviously, which has been a theme of my life. Now, the other thing we talked about in this gentle intro are the kind of, remember, we're talking now about practical implications for daily life of fractalfield.com science. And the main, oh, hi, Michael Obeck is there from Hawaii. Welcome, welcome. The main practical implication that you could kind of meditate on for tonight's conversation is the meaning of my bumper sticker. Now, my bumper sticker has been updated. It used to say, get fractal or get dead, or get centripetal or get dead. But some people say that's a pretty negative way of looking at it. So instead, we're changing the bumper sticker for fractal field science to say, get centripetal or get fractal, get centripetal and get immortal, or get centripetal and get sustainable. And in fact, we're going to define all sustainability. Remember, that's the buzzword of all eco-science today. We're going to define sustainability as the ability to get centripetal. And tonight in the slideshow, there will be some pictures of this. We're going to use examples that a seed is alive or dead, specifically electrically, based on whether or not it's centripetal. Can the seed suck in the first nutrient? Then it's alive. If the seed can't suck, and it really sucks, then the seed's dead, right? Well, the same is true of tornadoes, right? Tornadoes are alive as long as they're imploding, as long as they're centripetal. Hello. The same is true of DNA. We're going to show that, you know, the hydrogen bond fractal at the center of the DNA ladder, then it braids recursively when you have bliss and love. EKG phonons braid the DNA. And suddenly you get a massive centripetal implosion in DNA, and that's called human bliss, and blood begins to implode, and, you know. And so the DNA gets immortal when it's centripetal. Tornadoes get immortal when they're centripetal. Seeds get immortal when they're centripetal. And fundamentally, your aura. So this is the point, that when your aura is able to get electrically centripetal, your aura gets big. And you see, this is kind of the storal to the Mori. This is, you wanted a practical application. You know, even if you're not willing to have the conversation about how to get immortal, that's too big a conversation. But whether you say it how to get immortal, or how to get healthy, or how to lucid dream, or how to take memory through death, the answer is the same in each case, whether you're religious or not. The answer is simple: get a big aura. The aura is the result of the centripetal charge. So how do you get centripetal? That is the fundamental question here. Remember, we're saying when waves line up in this rose-shaped fractal, they charge, implode, and they get centripetal. So this has very fundamental implications for, you know, locating sacred space, because now you know the reason you're doing that, because your aura, your charge needs to implode, and it's not going to happen very well in metal buildings in electrosmog. No, every yogi, we said many times, every yogi in India that ever lived to be hundreds of years old, not one of them did it in a metal building with electrosmog. Your aura can't implode very well there. So this introduces whole conversation about hygiene. Hygiene, in other words, why does your clothing need to be a high dielectric constant? This is a hemp shirt. Hemp is some of the highest dielectric we have. What does dielectric mean? It means organic material in a sense, but it means the molecules got fractal, achieve charge distribution efficiency, which means the capacitor works very efficiently, which means your charge can unpack, which means you can move charge in and out of your aura, what in religious terms is called the quality of grace. So you see this get centripetal or get dead motif very clearly. Also, we mentioned in the introduction that understanding this longitudinal wave mechanic mechanism is the mechanism of the collective unconscious, the communion of saints, the Akashic records. Why do the Druids and the Aboriginals only make phone calls to ancestors in certain places? As Karakov followed the Kogi to where they made phone calls to their ancestor, measured the fractality of the air, and sure enough, the air is charge distribution efficient, sometimes called fractal, and you can measure that. You can measure sacred space. So the reason, for example, you could also only get the military quality of telepathy in a cozy rev mirror, which are these just metal cylinders, which are microwave active to embed the microwave of ADP, ATP. And this telepathy works over thousands of miles, as Karakov proved. But these metal cylinders, called cozy rev mirrors, only produce this quality of telepathy thousands of miles apart if you place them exactly on the magnetic line crosses of Earth, and it was measured in nanoteslas. Why? Because where the magnetic lines cross, called four-wave mixing, you get this, it's called a dimpling, a JED in geomantic science, which is basically phase conjugation. It produces that cone, that vortex, that embeds the longitudinal from the transverse. And by the way, if you want to make a flame with your mind at a distance, as Ingo Swann did in the laboratory replicably through a Faraday cage, you take the longitudinal waves that you produced at the tip of that cone, we'll have the animation in a minute, and you cross them again at the four-wave mixing cross. And the transverse electromagnetic the longitudinal compressional magnetic resynthesize the transverse component, which is the heat containing, and so you can contain heat at a distance with longitudinal interferometry. This is the holy grail of plasma fusion. Heat containment at a distance is absolutely the holy grail of understanding the ability to achieve fusion and plasma containment. And it's what a flame in the mind is. So longitudinal interferometry is the ultimate technology secret, as well as the ultimate secret of psychokinesis and spiritual evolution. And actually, it's how you steer a tornado in general. And this then gets back to our more basic question here. Remember, we had said many times that if you were watching a shaman steer a tornado and you had a bit of clairvoyance, you would see, and we've told this story so many times, it may be boring, but I'm going to tell it one more time. If you had a bit of clairvoyance, you probably would see a little bit of the bioplasmic streamer, of the plasma of the aura of the shaman, travel over and embed in the tornado. And eventually you'd see the entire aura of the shaman embed, nest. Remember, what's called entanglement is the climax perfection of perfect embedding, sometimes called perfect phase conjugation. So phase conjugation, that charge implosion, is precisely what embedding or perfect entanglement is. So the string theory wormhole that is a tornado has now been perfectly embedded with the aura of that shaman, enabling that shaman to steer the tornado. How? So how did you get the force inside your head to steer a tornado outside your head? Remember our ancient story of the lady in the hologram with the mirror and the magnifying glass, that, the hologram inside you, Carl Friedman's book, The Optical Cortex, is a hologram, and therefore you got a hologram inside your head. And interferometry is called a sacred alphabet, Hebrew and Sanskrit, etc. So suddenly now you got a hologram outside your head, because mass is a hologram with a weight problem, as everyone knows. And so now you get a hologram inside your head. So how does the hologram inside your head steer a tornado outside your head? Well, the solution to that problem is conjugate embedding, because the transfer of inertia is made possible, exactly in the way we said that longitudinal waves can refocus at a distance and be steered to have plasma containment. So effectively, in the same way that when your aura is big, you are more likely to be able to lucid dream and therefore take memory through death. What's meant by that is you have developed a refinement of the quality of attention, which enables you to attend to the crest of the wavefront Instead of the crest of the wavefront being the transverse component, which is where your attention normally resides, when you close your eyes and your aura, which is your charge envelope made of cold plasma, it's measurable, its coherence is measurable. When that aura, it's called your ka in Egypt, which your boat into the underworld. That's your ka. But when that aura implodes due to phase conjugation, inertia down the pine cone, and produces a longitudinal component, and we'll have that graphic here in a moment, suddenly that inertia that was going up and down is now a longitudinal or scalar or compressional wave. Now, to be able to follow the wavefront of that compressional wave at a distance with your attention is a refinement in the quality of attention. Remember, attention is just a name for the ability to ride the center of imploding charged donuts. That's what attention is. It is the centripetal force that results from imploding charged donuts, as Bill Tiller proved when he measured dozens of times that focused human attention causes electric fields to compress in his famous physics book, Conscious Acts of Creation. So how do you get that attention refined to the point where you can track the longitudinal wave traveling away from your body, which is the ba from the ka? In the Egyptian sense, remember, the ba is what went through the speed of light. That's what goes through death. It's like, in the Egyptian metaphor, it is a seed that is compressed and pops out of the husk or shell of the ka. The ka, the coherence of the aurora, the ba, the part of that can be accelerated coherently through the speed of light, which we now know is a longitudinal component. In the metaphor of the quasi-spiritual science, you have the etheric body, the classic capacitive field of your aura, and then what's called the astral, which is this component that is superluminal, longitudinal, the ba from the ka. So that ability to develop that quality of refinement of attention, which literally is the ability to lucid dream, astral travel, remote view, all of these things, which comes when your aura gets so phase coherent that out of the center of its implosion, you can track the cascade of longitudinal and superluminal and make them then again cross at a distance with your attention, as Ingo Swann did when he repeatedly lit that flame, that thermistor, made heat at a distance with his mind through a Faraday cage. We know that through that Faraday cage, only the longitudinal component of the electromagnetic can propagate. So this is an introduction to a true and deep spiritual science that connects the real electrical engineering of what's happening with your aura to all these spiritual stories about, well, this saint could subdivide his attention and they could act at a distance and do all this magic stuff. Well, guess what? The Druids and the Aboriginals, they all did it the same way. They developed that quality of attention, and they leveraged that by being at the point where the magnetic lines crossed, embedding in that longitudinal electromagnetic. That's why I encourage everyone to understand that, and we're going to present pictures of that in just a moment here. Okay, now we talked about the Akashic record, the collective library, magnetic lines embedding longitudinal. Oh yeah, we mentioned the fact that hospitals, because a hospital is so full of electrosmog in general, it is the worst possible place electrically to do birth, death, or bliss. And you can understand that. And, if you want a sustainable birth or death, we're suggesting use a magnetic line cross, which probably will not be a hospital. And then in the introduction, we talked about the definition of temple. And this will bring up what Teresa Burns and Alan will present in a later course here from the Schwaller de Lubitz work, Temple in Man. That, remember when Schwaller de Lubitz tracked the geometry of the Luxor temple and showed basically it was the alchemy of implosive charge compression of waveguides, the green language, as in with the carvings on the wall of the Gothic Cathedral, green language. Teresa will talk about that. The temple is basically a place where charge can coherently implode sufficiently that a core group could project their attention collectively. Now, this was an introduction to the climax part of the introduction. Remember, we call this a big picture. Remember now, we're saying it's probably a little difficult for you to conceive at this moment that your aura is due to get big enough to steer a star. We have a climax slide here. In fact, maybe let's just scroll to the end. We're doing this fractally, right? The end is the beginning. So here's the climax slide. Let's see, did I get this right? Yes, yes, here it is. Okay, yes. So, um, the climax of this conversation in terms of becoming a sun god and graduating, etc., is that your aura needs to get big, right? Well, eventually, your aura needs to get big enough to be centripetal enough to affect the metabolism of a star, because we're saying that stars do not go to all this work, we said this many times, to make DNA for no good reason. No, stars need something we make. And this graphic is a relatively good picture. In fact, I'm going to zoom in just a hair here, playing with our toys. So 11 different times it was measured when more than 1 million children sang at the same moment, and you average those equations, those events, it's simply a count of the number of solar flares. If you counted the number of solar flares and averaged them for 11 different events, this is what happened to the count of the number of solar flares each time on 11 different occasions when more than 1 million children sang the same song, which is, say, people meditated together. This is one of those events on the right, and this is an average of 11 here. Notice that dramatic fall in the number of solar flares. So clearly there is some preliminary evidence saying that collective humanity can make enough centripetal force. Remember, Bill Tiller, one of the most famous physicists around, proved that focused human attention makes centripetal force. No physicist could deny that because there's too many measurements. But to say that 1 million humans together make enough centripetal force to steer a star, well, there may be only a few physicists ready for that conversation. But the reason we're talking about it now is, has your child grown up and said, when I grow up, am I going to be a star? And mom or dad needs an answer. That your aura was designed to get big. And so we were talking about what is a temple. What we talked about in the introduction here was when Akhenaten got the assignment purportedly from the Syrians, if you believe Daniel Stewart's book, God King Akhenaten, that he was supposed to build a solar plasma temple. Think Jerusalem, Uru Asa LM, Uru dragon, ancient dragon ancestor blood, Asa queen royal ancestor blood, makes the L or phase shift, Uru Asa LM, literally stargate or portal. And the L is a name for exactly what we're discussing here, the conversion from transverse to longitudinal and ability to place your attention in that L or phase shift. So Uru Asa LM is a name for a stargate. Well, that stargate, Jerusalem, is broken, so we're suggesting that we should cancel the war. Instead, we need to learn how to build one. And that was Akhenaten's assignment, which, when he was supposed to build Amenti, Amarna, it was a giant solar plasma accelerator. The correct form of temple is a place where, if humans come together there, the capacitance is so implosive that if they do synchronized active bliss experience, and probably if they have practiced ahead learning to lucid dream as a group called soul group, then the possibility exists that the entire plasma cocoon of that whole group could be imploded, projected into the sun. Now, the Egyptians were very knowledgeable about this. They knew that Enki Osiris, if he didn't go into the sun, the Nile wouldn't flood on time. Well, there's some very good physics about that we can talk about in depth. But basically, the solar body is an example of a body that needs that collective centripetal force. Now you say that sounds pretty abstract, and I'm not sure I'm ready to go into the sun. Well, remember, we said this is a big picture. The fact is that the unconscious urge to have a war over access to stargates like Jerusalem is actually because your deep unconscious knows that you are effectively toast and did not graduate from the kindergarten unless, da-da-da, and graduation requires access to this solar temple. Now, temple here is defined as plasma accelerator, implosive device. So you line up the capacitance, get the dielectric of the walls, get the geometry right, and then you measure the power spectra, and now we're going to show that in the slideshow of how you measure the capacitance of buildings to know whether you've accomplished a temple. And one of the ways you can tell is there's a difference in the seed germination rate in that place because seeds get centripetal or get dead. Okay, so was that an intro? So here's the big picture. The big picture is we're learning fractal science in order to get a big aura. And there's nothing selfish about that because, in fact, and this is the last part of the introduction before we go to our slideshow, is to understand why it is that electrically your aura gets bigger every time you think a shareable thought. And again, this is a conversation we've had many times. Remember, this is review. That the collective plasma, the charge envelope of the universe, particularly the Earth, particularly at places where magnetic lines have crossed in a fractal. In metal buildings in ugly cities, this is not so much so. The charge is not so self-aware. But if you're in nature somewhere and you have a eureka, a perfectly shareable idea, there is a high probability that your hair will stand up. And the reason your hair stands up is because you've created implosive capacitance, and that implosive capacitance is self-aware. In other words, all the charge around your environment says, I need to get immortal or I'll be dead. And the charge environment in your environment is happy to jump into you if it perceives that you have found a way to steer that charge into the implosive, immortal, shareable wave vortex. So when you think a shareable thought, you implode charge and your hair stands up because the collective charge knows that you are its way to sustainable immortality. For the same reason that all the children in the car need to take a pee as you drive by the sound of a really running river. Because we've used this example too many times, but you see why? Because the water inside your body wants to join the sustainable flow. Sustainable flow is a pretty good name for this principle, which is why you don't want to sleep over a water vein because your aura is going to go with the water. Okay, so this was our gentle introduction this evening, and you see that how the big picture fits the little picture here, that now we want to turn this science of fractal field, which is literally the science, and I do mean science, of how to get centripetal. We want to turn that into a discipline that could be shared with universities and governments. And this is why we're plotting to do even more advanced physics papers with more equations on this. Remember, and this is why we're having Mark Rohrbaugh with us a week from today. Remember, I did original equations showing that golden ratio in a line produced max constructive wave interference. Actually, I did that with Bill Donovan and Martin Jones in our paper, Mathematics of Fusion, fractalfield.com/mathematics of fusion. And we used the Gordon-Klein equations in a generalized wave equation to prove that if you line up waves in golden ratio in a line, you produce maximum constructive wave interference, which by definition is maximum constructive charge compression, which by definition is fractality. Then we further showed that if you take that line and you radiate that line in 12 vectors in 3D, that same line is the infinite stellation of the dodecacosa, which later I proved is the radii of hydrogen. So now we know exactly what the only possible three-dimensional fractal is, perfect implosive charge. So I started there, we had some equations, we got going, and then Mark wrote equations about the proton-electron mass and mass ratio as non-destructive charge collapse, extending Nassim's idea about protons effectively being a black hole. We now know what a black hole is, which is a place where you can phase conjugate charge waves through the Planck threshold through the speed of light by golden mean ratio times the speed of light, producing longitudinal waves which are faster than light, and the charge that goes out the drain of the vortex that way has turned compression into acceleration of charge towards center, and that's named the gravity. So the way out for charge at the center is how gravity can happen. The charge needs a way out through the speed of light at center. I have discovered what that is when you add and multiply those waves down that cone. And that's the next picture coming up in this series. So here's our picture. You've seen this many times. The waves are adding and multiplying here, not just the wavelengths. Remember, this is a top-down view of DNA, every living protein, and I proved this is the top-down view of hydrogen when I showed the three radii of hydrogen are exactly golden ratio. So when the waves add and multiply recursively constructively in this top-down view of the infinite mass pentagram vortex top view, they add and multiply not just the wavelength, but the phase velocity constructively recursively. And that proportion of that charge that's here experiencing compression turns a portion of that energy, that's a residual, Mark is going to talk about next week, a portion of that charge, yes, yes, Mark, please go ahead. A portion of that charge inertia adds and multiplies the phase velocity, and recursive adding and multiplying of phase velocity turns a part of that charge into acceleration, phase velocity, added and multiplied, acceleration of charge towards center results in the charge then accelerates through the speed of light at the center by longitudinal. Yes, Mark?
Yeah, I have a question. I'm setting up a mathematical problem based upon your diagrams here, by the way. And one of the things I notice is if you look at your compressed sine waves, they're actually increasing in frequency. They start out slow, and it's a nice progression to higher and higher frequency.
Right.
Maybe an analogous to that gravity wave detector where it chirped, What
Yes.
do you think? What do you think is the mechanism, the force, the energy that's causing the energy or the frequency increase? Because that's an energy increase. A higher frequency is higher energy.
Yes.
So where does that energy come from?
Yes. In other words, phase conjugation, perfect adding and multiplying of wavelengths and phase velocity, is the perfect implosive heterodyne. Heterodyne is just a name for wave interference gone recursive, right? Well, the perfect form of that recursion, where it's all constructive and no destructive interference generated, so that phase conjugation is the perfect chirp, which is how radio people talk about a perfect heterodyne. So yes, and that cascades toward the infinite. And so that's a good language to extend this conversation. And let me get to another slide here and see if it gives more light on that thought, Mark, as well. So here is the side view now. And so my equation, which was Planck length and time times integer exponents of golden ratio, the origin of all biologic negentropy, and the cover of my book, predicted these frequencies, 2.78, 4.5, 7.29, 11.9 hertz, which we're later going to see are the Schumann harmonics, are the brainwave harmonics for bliss, and are here the frequencies Priori used to make plasma that healed, which we later perfected and became Theraphi.net. Implosive phase conjugate negentropic time reversing plasma field, Theraphi.net, commercially successful in 15 countries, based on my new equation, which for the first time explained how Priori's device worked. So this particular perfect chirp, perfect heterodyne, perfect cascade, as I think Mark made a lovely little whistling sound. I like the way you did that, Mark. And the other thing we wanted to know.
I learned that from the Italians I worked with at S. Thompson, which is ST Microelectronics now. the Italians and my boss at headquarters at Texas Instruments, they like to make these chirping sounds when they're describing feedback systems. Okay, yeah, sorry.
No, that's good. And the perfect recursion in feedback. Consciousness is the perfect feedback loop. It's non-destructive self-reentry. And so the perfect recursion in a feedback loop, the perfect loop within a loop, perfect embedding, perfect entanglement, perfect conjugation, perfect implosion, perfect fractality, it's all the same thing.
Yeah. One more comment, Dan. You just said the key thing what I've found is where all the leading minds of science is right now is consciousness.
Yeah.
And that aspect of the feedbacks, there was the first consciousness symposium a couple years ago, like 2015. That's becoming serious science now. I think you're only 30 years ahead of them. I don't know. Anyways, let you get back to it here.
Well, but that is what we're saying here, is that when a cloud of charge imploding tornadoes implodes with perfect recursion through the speed of light, it generates that connectivity superluminal net, longitudinal EMF embedded. And that enables a self-organization, first measured in phase conjugate optics, who didn't understand why it generated self-organization, literally the origin of negentropy. And we named that principle consciousness, with turning inside out ness consciousness. Yes? So perfect turning inside out recursion. And that creates that self-organization. So consciousness is not limited at all to human bodies. Gaia is supposed to be self-aware because it's self-regulating. Well, it's because the Schumann harmonics, you get the flavor. So at the bottom of this slide here, we were just going to first mention that in red here, we see that my equation there predicted hydrogen radii, the only two effective photosynthesis frequencies, Schumann harmonics. It predicted the most important frequency in the body. I'm going to zoom in here just a little bit as we have this conversation, which is the HRV, LF, and the HRV LF component, 0.1 hertz, which is not only the most important frequency of the heart, the LF component, 0.1 hertz, literally the core of all heart coherence. It is the most important frequency of the blood, called the Mayer wave. It's predicted exactly by my equation, and it is the motor where the fine liquid pump begins the mechanism of Kundalini. And then it predicts the brainwave frequencies of bliss. It predicts the sacrocranial tidal frequencies. It predicts the ear ringing heard by meditators. And it predicts virtually exactly the duration of the Earth year, the Venus year, the galactic year, and the precessional year. And I want to thank Mark for his help with that. And many, many other things. So everything, that we're going to see that graph in a minute, everything that's on that line, golden ratio times Planck, powers of golden ratio called conjugation phases, predicts you're on the path to negentropy, which is to say you're emerging from chaos, which means you can argue with physicists who are saying the universe is condemned to entropy. And I'm saying the opposite. Hello, I'm a little bit less fatalistic. Thank you very much. At the bottom of this slide, we're making the point that when Priory first used these frequencies, he got dramatic effect on seed growth and plant growth, as we do now with the Theraphi. Amazing effect on plants nearby. So the plants love it. Why? Because they need to get centripetal or get dead, just like seeds and people. So, and we're going to see that in the slide, but we applied that commercially at the Imploder.com. So it's literally a bioactivefield.com. So at still point, X is asking a question. I understand that you create a large range of frequencies, but is it possible to use your own frequencies along with having access to the spark generated by Theraphi? What we're saying is that biological structures generate this cascade from within, and they get implosive, centripetal, self-empowered, and able to steer their own tornado. Now, we're not saying that you want an external source to make this frequency for you. No. We are saying, however, that you need to be able to embed in these frequencies and pretty much no other if you want to achieve implosive embedding. In other words, another way of saying that is alpha frequencies are the beginning of human bliss and psychokinesis all the time, every day. There's no other way around it. You got to make alpha to start. And what is the alpha frequency around 8 hertz? It is the Schumann resonance of the Earth. And what is that frequency? Actually, in my equation here, it's the 7.29 hertz here, perfected. It's because it fits this cascade. So ultimately, you do need to make these frequencies for yourself from within, which is the only way to make the brainwaves to start with bliss. You can use biofeedback to help you learn how to do it. You can use the Theraphi to learn you help you. You can use flameinmind.com, the flame in sound perfect bliss inducing binaural world to help generate these frequencies. So obviously, yes, you need to make them for yourself. But ultimately, do you have a choice of what frequencies to use to do it right? No. Physics tells you what frequencies work. It is Planck. Look, even the British foot, all sacred measures are multiple Planck. There's a reason for that. So we'll continue this dialogue. Okay. So here is the most important slide. This is the only really new slide in this group, guys. Halden Stout is saying, to clarify, the frequency is 0.1 hertz for seed growth activation and heart frequency for bliss. Well, 0.1 hertz is the only frequency heart math calls heart coherence. But that's because 0.1 hertz is the most important frequency of the heart. It's the LF, low frequency component of the heart rate variability, the most studied subject in all of medicine, HRV. So 0.1 hertz is not only the most important frequency of the heart, it's the most important natural resonance frequency of blood pressure. And it's the beginning of the harmonics that make the spine liquid pump, the phonon wave peristaltic pumping, which is the mechanism of Kundalini and bliss. So 0.1 hertz is very, very important to biology. And by the way, my equation predicts 0.979 hertz or something. It's very close to 0.1. It's beautiful. 0.09. So Is that also important for plants? Yes, although in this conversation, we have been talking about it mostly in terms of, but 0.1 hertz would be very related to the Schumann harmonic series, and we're going to see in a minute why. Okay, this slide is where I started the ideas of this presentation tonight, because I wanted people to be able to think clearly about what's happening when two pine cones kiss noses. Whether you're talking about how lasers meet to phase conjugate perfectly opposing pine cones kissing noses in a high dielectric barrier surrounding a titanate phase conjugate mirror. What is happening is that, now this is if you look at the slideshow, topfractalu.com, for tonight's conversation, you will see this animated. However, putting this animation, making these slides animated on the screen tonight is messy with regard to the Learn It Live software, because if you do live shared desktop in learnitlive.com, the bandwidth requirements get so messy that everybody gets messed up, and I decided it's just too much work to actually animate these things. But in the actual slideshow, when you go to fractalu.com and click on this slideshow with near the top, you will see this animated. And what you're going to see is here, this transverse wave is going up and down, up and down. It's like a worm, like this, okay? And versus the longitudinal wave here, you're seeing this compression wave going this way. So the compression wave is traveling in the direction of the propagation of the wave on the right, in which is called longitudinal EMF, compression wave, sometimes called scalar or torsional, or in fact, Canisius, when he caused water to burn, called it circular RF. But the point is that all of our communication technologies involving electromagnetics, radio, etc., uses only the transverse up and down component, okay? Whereas if you want to go faster than light, and if you want to reach into the center of the atom in the nucleus, you must use the longitudinal here. So to get from the transverse, to make that L, or phase shift, or perfected translation of vorticity, what happens is the vertical up and down component enters this spiral on a cone, and as that inertia, which is going up and down, which think of it as going around this circle, okay? The inertia is going up and down around the circle. But if it falls into the spiral on the cone here, called phase conjugation, then the inertia gets what's called optimized translation of vorticity, which is how golden spiral is defined in hydrodynamic physics. If you put the spiral on the cone, remember this is 3D, the shadow from the side view of that is called the caduceus. This is hermetic science, in essence, phase conjugation. So the inertia then travels down the cone, and what entered the cone going up and down, that inertia is not lost. It's translated in vorticity, and as it comes out the tip of the cone, at precisely the Planck dimension, that's the diameter of the place where the pine cones kiss noses, is Planck, time and length. And that at that dimension only, because that's the only place where the waves can agree perfectly, and everything is about perfect agreement. That's what phase conjugation is, producing agreement among waves. So where they learned to agree is with Planck. That's really the only definition of the Big Bang there ever was Planck. That's why Planck is the same for 1,000 light years in all directions. And that's why the DNA radio works 1,000 light years in all directions as well. So the wave emerges as a longitudinal wave out the tip of the cone, a compressional wave. So that's a translation of vorticity. It's making the L, or phase shift, from the Ka to the Ba. And the longitudinal waves, as Tom Bearden spent half his life on this, the longitudinal EMF, incorrectly called scalar or torsional, are demonstrably faster than light. And if you cross these longitudinal waves again at a distance, the longitudinal wave in itself will not make heat. However, it'll reach right into the nucleus and produce that agreement, that place where they hard bounce. And that's what allows you to reach right into the nucleus with longitudinal. And you cannot do that with transverse. And that's why you can conjugate with longitudinals and not transverse. And that's the point at which it becomes faster than light. And that faster than light quality enables action at a distance. Because when you cross the longitudinal waves at a distance in a grid, they will resynthesize the transverse component and make heat again. So you can remotely control the place where there is heat, called the Holy Grail, of plasma fusion physics, and how Ingo Swann lit a flame with his mind, and the ultimate science of plasma containment, and what Einstein called spooky action at a distance, because he could not conceive of what went faster than light, because he didn't understand phase conjugation, which is why he never understood why an object falls to the ground. Because that is what gravity waves are made of. Tom Bearden's famous scalar wave detector is in effect a gravity wave detector. I didn't put that in the slideshow, but the famous 25-cent capacitor that picked up gravity waves faster than light by Heterodyne and Ramsey, a whole lot better than Weber's multi-million-dollar gravity wave detectors. The capacitive coupling of the scalar longitudinal is a gravity wave detector for this reason right here. And so when the waves have a way out through center for charge accelerated through the speed of light at center, that's the reason gravity exists, because charge can't go down the drain hole without a way out. And that's what non-destructive compression is, which is Einstein's name for gravity. So this conjugate implosion is the mechanism and cause of gravity, electronegativity, all centripetal forces. It's the origin of life force. It's the origin of consciousness, all entropy. That's a very important slide. And I hope we have perfect agreement on that one. So at one point I called this fiery case phi recursion induced charge acceleration implosion solution. And this is a gorgeous animation in the original slide, which you can see at fractalu.com. Okay. And we've talked about this. So then later we developed this into an equation for the radii of hydrogen, which we will have more slides about. So showing that multiples of Planck produce the fundamental physical constants like hydrogen radii and perfectly charged collapse is the beginning of showing how to get on this road toward negentropy. Yes, Anne is asking appropriately about Agnihotra. Yes, we're saying that Agnihotra, remember that time when my hair stood up only at that perfect time, instant of sunrise, sunset, when you light the Agnihotra flame, was because the sun and the earth were at the right conjugate angle to produce conjugation. And then you have this phase conjugate copper gold pyramid with the phase conjugate living plasma flame of the purified butter with the purified ash. So you phase conjugate shortwave into plasma, long wave in the capacitor, longer wave yet in the right angle to the horizon, sunrise, sunrise, massive broad spectral phase conjugation. Agnihotra is like the Theraphi in this regard. The Theraphi will work better in the same circumstance, for sure. And suddenly in Poland, where we had this Agnihotra Science Center, the whole area had turned, the whole farm became a fertility magnet, and all the other farms around were like a desert. But only there they had this dramatic increase in fertility. Remember, Agnihotra, the Bhopal survivors did Agnihotra, and in Nagasaki, same story. So centripetal force is the opposite of radioactivity. So this is the equation. I wouldn't mind having this on my bumper sticker or my gravestone, I guess. But this is the ultimate, and I want to thank Mark Rohrbaugh for helping with the graphics to show the implications of my discovery here. So I took my equation, origin, biologic negentropy, Planck length or time times integer exponents of golden ratio. Just golden ratio powers, exact powers of Planck length and time. An exact multiple of Planck produced 3 exact radii of hydrogen, the exact dimension, 1.93 angstroms of the ADP-ATP, the actual most important bond in all cell metabolism, adenosine diphosphate. It produced exactly the 2 frequencies of photosynthesis, only 2, by the way, I will show the graph. It produced exactly the dimension of the British foot, the definition of sacred space. The pure scale of all sacred dimensions. It produced the Schumann harmonics, the brainwave harmonics for bliss, produced the LF-HRV, the Mayer wave, produced exactly the Venus year and Earth year, precessional year, and the galactic year, all predicted almost exactly by Planck times golden ratio. Why? Because that is perfected phase conjugate, non-destructive, implosive charge collapse. And Mark and I are developing equations to prove why and how that is the cause of gravity. And here I just included the slide about the two. There's the only 2 frequencies that make photosynthesis go at 0.427 nanometers, purple and orange 691 nanometers. The only frequency that allow photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is prevented by green, but photosynthesis happens with these 2 frequencies only, and they happen to be exactly golden ratio 136 and 137 power exactly times Planck for that reason, that photosynthesis is phase conjugate negentropic charge collapse. So that's why it works. That's why it's self-organizing. And that's the equation worked out. Thank you, Mark, for help with that graphic. And here we're just showing how you would visualize this applying to the radii of hydrogen, 3 radii of hydrogen, Planck times 116, 117, 118 power of golden ratio. And again, Mark, thank you for your help doing this graphic. So using my equation to predict these exact radii of hydrogen from my equation, you see hydrogen is making gravity because the waves of charge are imploding towards center. That's what makes it negentropic. So that's how hydrogen is a black hole. Now here, and again, this is review, you've all seen this before. Here on the right is my equation for the frequencies. These are the multiples, 11.819 hertz. And the bottom in green are the Schumann harmonics, published, known, the frequency. Look, see how close that is to my equation. And then if you zoom out, perfect caduceus, perfect charge implosion, perfect frequency series are exactly the frequencies of the brain waves that produce bliss, implosive, charge collapse, negentropic, get centripetal, or get dead. And so then here we showed that if you take multiples of golden ratio, you produce the branch points in the Mandelbrot fractal is effectively a golden ratio implosive nest fractality. And it's self-evident that golden ratio is perfect fractality because self-similarity is the definition of golden ratio. And this, if you look at the 4 lasers making phase conjugate optics, and the perfect way these caduceus, pine cones, kiss noses, all based on golden ratio. So this is the graph of the perfect 4-wave mixing, pine cones, etc. And if you take that hex in 3D, shadow that cube, you get the pairs of primary colors. And here is where we applied this to the, yes, here, zoom up. So I just took that equation and I did, and this is animated in 3D in the fractal. In the fractalu.com version of this slide, so in this vortex nozzle actually rotates in front of it. It's pretty sexy. But anyway, so I took that spiral on that cone, did the equation, and imported to CAD-CAM and made the nozzle, which became the Imploder.com for the perfect vortex. And if that water is even slightly hard, you get implosive capacitance here. And if the seeds are planted near that cone here, even if they don't touch the water, they grow faster because implosive capacitance is seed germination. So the harder the water, the better this thing actually works. And so you get the spun water molecule capacitively charged down this vortex, which is the essence of what Steiner called dynamization. And the Steiner people use my triploder, these vortex nozzles, for perfect dynamization in biodynamic farming. And that charged spun water molecule then enters the world's strongest magnetic flux, magnetic water treatment, and produces incredible spin density increase and solubility increase. And it's incredibly healing for skin conditions, for example. We typically have 20 to 40% growth increase in plants, particularly if it was hard water. It will often replace a water softener. And it's profoundly healthy for people because solubility, hydration is the issue of so many diseases, back problems, hair problems, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, in fact, is this Victor Schauberger related? Mark is asking. Actually, it's so Victor Schauberger related that we call this design Schauberger's dream. And we think that Schauberger was right, that it would begin generating electricity from gravity when it spontaneously gets colder, because for the same reason that the plasma tubes in the Theraphi, which is our next slide, spontaneously gets colder. That the spontaneously getting colder part of this is precisely what negentropy is, that heat is simply a measure for disorder. So obviously increased order equals reduced heat. And so the tips of the plasma tube in Theraphi or the perfect vortex in Schauberger. And we're going to have a picture of Schauberger in a minute about that. So the next commercial practical example of this is the Theraphi.net here. And this is the picture from the Egyptians using a plasma tube with a voltage source to produce what they called, I will raise a Shem unto the Lord. And all the, the Ancient Aliens TV show say this is the Egyptians inventing the light bulb. And I say, crap, they don't have a clue. No, this is the Egyptians inventing how to make an age rejuvenation field, which is even Zechariah Sitchin got that right. I will raise a Shem unto the Lord. He translated to mean highward firestone. which is implosive capacitance, which is age reversal, which was the stated problem of all Anunnaki Nephilim cultures, was age regressing. You know, because when they arrived at Earth, the atmosphere was less phase conjugate, and they started aging catastrophically, so they had to raise a Shem unto the Lord. Mistranslated later to the word altar in church, which is only a name for a capacitor that's implosive enough to reduce aging, and, by the way, radioactivity. Which, by the way, the Theraphi would do. So we took my equation, produced the perfect two opposing caduceus. The joke here is it says, we apologize if the Medical Association did not know what their logo was for. And here's the Planck dimension at the center. So when you tune and you get a massive broad spectral phase conjugation here between these two exact plasma tubes, we take a noble gas. The noble gas mixture is intellectual property, but the noble gas mixture is an optical phase conjugator. Then we modulate that accurately with a calculated phase conjugate resonant frequency, which is tunable right here at 500,000 volts in the sub-megahertz. And then we modulate on that wave exactly that low frequency cascade we just discussed. Remember the slide I said here's period frequency. So we got that low frequency from 3 to about 200 hertz cascade, very precisely locked in phase, modulated with the phase conjugate frequency, locked in phase at the megahertz range. And then we put that into a bifiller Tesla coil from the amp here, splitting that exactly 180 degrees out of phase. Remember, the pine cones have to kiss noses because they're mirror image 180 degrees out of phase, exactly the way your brain works to make a flame in mind. Then we take that massively broad spectral, all the way from ELF infrasound to the megahertz range to the noble gas optical conjugate range. And we have broad spectral phase conjugation. And the reason it's, as all the Lukovsky people said, Lukovsky did some of this in the lower frequency, but he didn't use plasma. So we have massive broad spectral phase conjugation, and all Lukovsky people agree that our device is like Lukovsky, but far more powerful and much, much faster because it's more broad spectral in its phase conjugation. So we're successful in 15 countries. We make no medical claims. However, the subjective anecdotal results are in by the hundreds and hundreds, and we're able to, the reports are clear, localized pain we can deal with very quickly, usually in just 1 or 2 sessions, and long-term chronic pain in many, but not all cases, we can help in, say, 5 to 15 sessions over that many days, even long-term and chronic pain, which is huge, and that's just the beginning. There's all kinds of other reports, Lyme's disease, cancers, et cetera, and I say these reports are anecdotal, and I make no medical claims. This device is safe and it's legal. However, it's clear that when you produce a rejuvenation negentropic plasma field broad spectral, you do something to help people charge their aura. They feel their fingertips tingle, and a large percentage of people have some kind of euphoria or bliss experience. 30% of the people by Paul's analysis actually report sharpened clarity of vision, and it goes on and on. So this is an example of applying the physics. Halden is saying, can I ask what would happen if you use the Theraphi inside of a pyramid or wearing a tensor ring? I'm highly curious. Remember, pyramid is implosive capacitance, and we're going to show some of the frequency signatures of a good pyramid, which is measurable with flame in mind in a moment. So actually, pyramid frequencies are already inside Theraphi. And a pyramid is like the Theraphi, which is it generates this implosive field, which would reduce radioactivity, and it's what's called hormesis in the scientific electrical analysis of sacred space, which means a little bit is good and a lot is too much. Sacred space and Theraphi and pyramids are all like that. A little bit is good and a lot is too much. Because if you get too much implosion, you get dehydration, and it's not good. Okay, and by the way, hydration and grounding are essential to using sacred space properly, to using Theraphi properly, to using pyramids properly. It's all about hydration and grounding. And by the way, we didn't finish that conversation where we started here about the power of grounding. Grounding is where you get electrically in phase. Grounding is fractal optimized charge distribution by definition, which puts you in phase lock 2, which enables embedding, enables compassion, enables charge reference 2. So grounding is so essential to all of these healing technologies. So we teach people hydrate and ground from Theraphi. So what I would say was, in theory, with the Theraphi, you wouldn't need a pyramid. However, a Theraphi and pyramid could be synergetic. However, I would show you in a few minutes how we take the frequency signature of a pyramid to show that it was optimized too. And we can actually produce pyramids now, which are correctly in phase with Schumann, since we know how to do it with a flame in mind, which is what we're talking about right now, flameinmind.com. So there's an option with a Brainwave device to analyze buildings and pyramids and life force. We'll show you in a moment. So this is the world's most sophisticated and powerful meditation teaching tool, brainwave spectrum analysis, flameinmind.com. This is me having a good day. Actually, this was me in the morning having discovered that this is working, and I was happy. So I made these brainwaves, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 harmonics, alpha, beta, delta, theta. Notice the delta here, huge. I'm sorry, here's theta. The theta waves are huge. Remember that they say theta healing? Well, here is theta healing defined. So all you theta healers out there, measure it. That's my challenge to you. Here's theta healing. But so these harmonics here are demonstrating several things. First of all, the frequencies, which are listed right here. This is about 8.5 hertz here. And this is about 13. No, I'm sorry, 14 to 15 hertz here. So these frequencies are exactly in golden ratio, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 harmonics. And so when the alpha to beta to begin with gets in golden ratio, you get this implosion going on in your brain waves. You're getting centripetal. And that implosion of charge defines bliss, euphoria, peak perception, ecstasy, and all that good stuff. And notice here we can measure whether the right and left hemispheres are balanced in power. We can measure whether the right and left hemisphere are lined up in frequency. So we can tell right left hemisphere dominance, many things. This is the cross hemispheric coherence here. And here is the power of that delta coherence showing up in the EEG raw data. Right hemisphere in red, left hemisphere in green. And here is the percentage of the alpha, beta, delta, theta here, density over time. So it's a very powerful brainwave biofeedback system. Flame in Mind is so cool. And what's cool here is, and again, this is animated in the slideshow online, but with the same device, you can hook up 2 hearts. Here's my partner and my EKG. Here's the raw EKG on top. Here's the filtered EKG minus the noise. Here's the first order power spectra, 0 to 20 hertz. And on the bottom, the amplitude of the primary peak of the second order power spectra called cepstrum is the definition of heart coherence. And so you can see when the 2 people's hearts line up, you can measure and teach empathy by measurement. Use it to teach Tantra, the largest bank in Australia, Melbourne. ANZ bought the system to teach bank managers how to achieve empathy. Very powerful. It's very cool. It's a very sexy system. This is another example of brainwave coherence. And here we're showing a breath training. This is a caduceus breath coming to a still point. At the still point of the breath, we produce the golden cascade. This shows the amount of power in golden ratio versus octave ratio in that cascade. Again, very powerful software. We have to honor Patrick Botti, who will be speaking on this in much more detail in upcoming course here at flameinmind.com and, I'm sorry, at fractalu.com. And then this summer at our international conference, beautiful South France, gorgeous venue, fractalfield.com/2018. Breakthrough Technologies Conference. You can read all about it. Exciting conference. Our programmer, Patrick, will be there, who developed this with me. And here's an example of a Mayer wave breathing induced. We have examples of it. It's induced actually by the perfect binaural beat audio, and you'll see more about that in Patrick's demonstration. But you can actually see the low frequency of the spine liquid here, because you can actually measure the blood pressure by using a fingertip pulse sensor to measure the low frequency of blood in synchrony with the brainwave coherence. Amazing technology, this flame in mind. And now, same device, here we're measuring a very happy tree, and this happy tree has 1, 2, 3, 4 harmonics at exactly the published frequencies of a healthy Schumann resonance. These are the actual frequencies of the Schumann harmonic series, according to physics, not according to Greg Braden, who's a little bit confused. No, these are the actual frequencies of the complex wave. So it's not that the Schumann harmonic is increasing in frequency. No, it's the Schumann harmonic can increase in harmonic inclusiveness, producing more centripetal force and therefore more negentropy, self-organization to Gaia. And here's how you measure it in Happy Tree, and here's how you measure it in a building, and here's where our partner measured it to show that the increased seed germination is the result of buildings that make these frequencies. I think that slide is here. We'll see that in a minute. So here's the same device measuring the amount of electrosmog in a room before and after the Theraphi plasma is lit. And the point was that the number of harmonics of electrosmog here are reduced during the Theraphi session, because these are the harmonics of the Theraphi, obviously. And here is after the Theraphi session for many minutes, the amount of electrosmog was reduced because the actual capacitance of the room was still imploding, for the same reason that the Ark of the Covenant reduces radioactivity. Centripetal force restored. Yes, here is our partner for these projects in life force by measurement. It's Juan Schlosser, bioarc.co. Beautiful work. He's been our partner in life force building measurement for biologic architecture design by measurement, bioarc.co. Thanks to Juan Schlosser for taking these measurements. So here is his measurement. Remember we showed the seed germination? In a bamboo building, you get the harmonic series here in yellow, Schumann harmonics here in blue, harmonic cascade in here, produce that seed germination and the harmonic inclusiveness inside the bamboo buildings. And Juan Schlosser proved that this did not work in a concrete reinforced with steel. So this is showing you some of the harmonic analysis available in Flame and Mind to measure sacred space. You can measure the number of phi harmonics, the dominant harmonics over time, the number of hits. It's a very elaborate statistical software. So this is what we were talking about before the DNA. This is the outline of what we discussed before. The ability to steer your own plasma cocoon by this plasma implosion, to steer your own tornado, is the difference between life and death. It's why individual freedom is sacred in spirituality and in philosophy and in science, because it's only if you steer from within. So your question was very appropriate. Do you always want those frequencies to come from outside you? No. The moment you can start able to make those frequencies from within is the moment when you steer your own tornado. And this is just a slide we've shown many times, but a reminder that when the heart turns inside out recursively, we call that compassion. Remember in our introduction, we said, at the moment when I took my sandals off in the BO co-op in Santa Barbara and touched the wooden floor with my moist feet, I noticed at that moment, I felt a rush of grounding, and I noticed at that moment about 3 people spontaneously turned to me and tried to start a conversation. Why were they all attracted to me at just that moment when my feet touched ground? You see, that was the beginning of the possibility of the phase lock, which initiates compassion, literally. And we make the example of the schools in Finland where they decided that all the kids were not going to wear shoes and they were going to be grounded. And there's a revolution in education where kids learn to be grounded. And why does that work? Because it allows electrical phase lock to charge distribution efficiency. And by the way, that doesn't work in metal buildings or concrete that has steel in it. No, it has to be biological material to achieve that ground. And that enables this phase lock, which happens also in the heart. So we showed the physics of compassion is when the heart turns out recursively and begins imploding, and the harmonics in the EKG increase in the harmonic inclusiveness, and that's heart coherence correlated directly to compassion. So again, get centripetal or get dead. And this is where we made a little animation of this, and this animation plays nicely in the other slideshow. But anyway, it's the idea is that turning inside out like a labyrinth is actually the beginning of teaching the possibility of compassion, because it teaches embedding. So people that live in ungrounded environments, you will find war. And Phil Callahan discovered that. And this is tornadoes inside tornadoes, turning inside out, recursively imploding. This is the old graphic. You see the harmonic series, 0.618, 1.618, 2.618. You could add and multiply any 2 numbers infinitely and always get the next one. Or you could take any number in the series and multiply by 1.618 and get the next one. For example, 1.618 squared is 2.618. So this is both adding and multiplying recursively, constructively. And this is not just a mathematical abstraction. This is actually the most important wave mechanics on the planet, because it's constructive interference solved, and therefore constructive compression solved. And that's what Einstein died wondering: what is infinite non-destructive compression? Guess what? He didn't know about golden ratio phase conjugation, or he'd have known what infinite non-destructive compression was, which was his definition for gravity. So here we're talking about access to ground, charge distribution. We have a question here. Halden Stout. If you use Theraphi at the moment you die, will you achieve the rainbow body? I like your question. Here's what I would say, that we know why it is scientifically documented that when great Tibetan saints die, there are generally rainbows. We understand the physics very well, because centripetal charge in the air is the physics of what allows rainbows to happen, because color is caused by phase conjugation. It is the reason that color exists, because that sorting only happens when charges implode. That's why the sea has to be absolutely still in order to see the green flash, for example. So what's called the rainbow body is the ability to implode charge at death. So I would say the Theraphi might help you. However, as we know with the Theraphi plasma, that we can light that flame around you, but only you can steer the tornado. So let me tell you a little story. The Theraphi plasma is famous for being like a pet puppy dog. There are some people it likes and some people it doesn't like. If somebody comes in the room and is skeptical and negative, it's better to gently ask them to leave than to try to experience the Theraphi, because it's not going to work so well. The reason is because the plasma from the Theraphi is self-aware. And over a period of days, it's like your pet puppy dog's living in the room and it decides who it likes. So your rainbow body is kind of like that. The plasma around your body can only sustain implosion if you yourself can steer the tornado. That's why we so often say, as you enter the Theraphi or any healing environment, is yes, the tornado is now ignited, but you need to practice steering it with your intent. We've got the tornado moving, but unless you can steer it for yourself from within, set your intention, decide what part of your body you want to move, notice that you are steering the tornado. That's the moment at which you get a little closer to being able to be part of the rainbow body. Because the rainbow isn't only a name for a phase conjugate distribution, perfect distribution of charge. Remember, perfect distribution of charge, Hey Ave, heaven, is the same thing as the Hebrew name for heaven, plains of Sharon, which Lawrence Gardner correctly surmised was the name for the capacitance around monatomic gold, which are, an electric field which could propagate at great radii, because phase conjugate dielectric, monoatomic gold, or MEs, could have electron orbitals who unpack their charge to vast dimensions. This is called the plains of Sharon, which is the Hebrew name for heaven. Why? Because heaven is perfected charge distribution. And you're not going to get to be at the center of that unless you can focus that implosion for yourself from within. So Theraphi, or sacred space, is going to put a lot of charge around your body, but unless you develop the inner muscle to steer that charge for yourself from within, you're not going to be able to steer the rainbow body. That's why we say Steiner was right. If young children, even before 7 and 7 to 14, spend too much time passively in front of devices that make pictures like TV and computers, they lose the inner muscle to steer charge from within, which is why children, instead of watching too much computer, should learn to draw the pictures of the rose until they can visualize the rose from inside their head with their eyes closed clear enough the room fills with the smell of roses. Sean Patrick is asking about the chestahedron. Yes, I've heard the chestahedron. It's related to dodecaecosa, obviously, and of course that would be embedded. I mean, dodecaecosa is the archetype of the Star Mother kit, goldamine.info kit, but I haven't studied the chestahedron enough to actually answer your question. Sorry, but I'm sure it's beautiful work. So we're just saying that now you can understand the attraction due to gravity, because charge implosion is gravity. And this ignites the faster light than light connection, making gravity. So this is just kind of visual when we talk about the charge implosions and mechanisms of gravity. And here we're talking about, I zoom in just a little bit. This is what I mentioned before about 25-cent capacitor picking up a faster than light gravity. Here's a star explosion light years away, measured faster than light, because the 25-cent capacitor called Rustrock Recorder by Rohodo Ramsey picked up gravity waves, which is basically a scalar wave detector, a lot better than the multi-million-dollar gravity wave detectors of Weber. Okay, and notice here, Nature said the universe is dodecahedral. New Scientist magazine said the universe is fractal. They didn't realize a perfect fractal is stellated dodecahedron, and neither one realized that was the cause of gravity. It's how the universe emerged from chaos and got negentropic. And now we're just going to present more examples of how tornadoes got centripetal. Notice the inner center of this tornado is pent. Repent and be saved. Why is that tornado pent? Because that's how it gets centripetal. And remember that if our environment was, if the magnetic lines of our environment were allowed to remain in their natural recursive state, then tornadoes would not be so destructive. Guys, there's just going to be about a 1-minute pause here. Excuse me 1 second. Sorry. Sorry about that. Back here. Okay. Oh yes. So you're working with Frank Chester's work, and I do think that it's ultimately will relate to the concept of implosion. There, right? The point we were making on this slide was that inability to create centripetal forces on the land by arranging magnetic lines to be fractal and supporting fractality in Earth's magnetic long lines. The inability to do that, to really do the song lines and have the shamanics and have the indigenous peoples, respect for the elementals. Without that, we get tornadoes that are more destructive. That's the essential point here, that there is no one to steer the tornadoes. So we complain about more tornadoes that are destructive, but we don't understand what steers them. And that's the tragedy, in a way, of many tragedies of Western culture. For example, tornadoes are famous for going out of their way to destroy a metal trailer park, whereas they will never destroy an ancient stone temple. The reason for that is important because the metal trailer park capacitive field feels like pain to the tornado. We need to understand why. Because pain is charge that bleeds due to broken fractality. That's what it is. That's why restored compression, which is fractality, eliminates pain, as in Theraphi.net. So the reason that the tornado feels metal human buildings as pain is because that's a capacitive field that bleeds charge. It cannot be centripetal. So very important that we understand how to restore elemental forces. A conversation underway, Jan Sisek talking about a bath in for electrosensitive people. Interestingly, so the 2 or 3 of the Theraphi centers use water recursively circulated through the super imploder in a spa, which in itself is known to heal many skin conditions, particularly psoriasis and eczema, in conjunction with the Theraphi. You have super soluble water is very synergetic to use with Theraphi. And Theraphi plasma treated water itself is powerful in that way, as well as also in Theraphi plasma treated essential oils, particularly hemp cannabis oil, so famous for cancer that if you use the plasma to treat the oil, it increases the power dramatically. Talking about the tornado principle here, this is from Universal One. And this is the picture we were talking about when we said if you watched the shaman steering the tornado, you'd see the bioplasmic streamers from his aura embed in the tornado, and then the shaman's plasma aura would become the center of gravity of that tornado by perfect embedding, entanglement, conjugation, implosion. So which is literally the shortwave embedding on the wall. So getting your aura centered in a tornado to then steer that tornado is so powerful because you know that physics is made of nothing but tornadoes, wormhole string theory, which is to say if you can steer one tornado, you can steer everything that physics knows with your mind. And this is how they tracked the geometry of what makes a tornado self-organize in the Twister movie, etc. And they actually used the balls to see how the tornado organized itself. And this is how the tornado makes itself self-aware. Perfect slip knot, and this is the Anu, obviously. And the perfect slip knot, Anu, is the beginning of all tornado net. 7 spins inside, 5 spins outside. And that's the Anu, which is here, which is clearly clairvoyantly seen to be the heart of the sun. And 7 layers outside, 5 inside, the heart of the human, co-defining the 7 spins of the tetra. And then if you had subatomic clairvoyance, as Leadbeater and Desant did in occult chemistry, they saw exactly this shape as the heart of hydrogen, which later we proved is fractal. And so that's the perfect slip knot. And why did it have 5 spins inside, 7 spins outside? Well, that's what a tetracube, 7 spins is. Inside dodecahedron goes for the 5 spins. So embed the tetracube in the dodecahedron, you have 5 spins, 7 spins, and that's the perfect slip knot. And that's what all of the occult clairvoyants saw as the heart of the sun, the heart of the human, and the heart of hydrogen. Perfect implosive centripetal slip knot. Anu, sun god, get centripetal or get dead. This is the old slide about fiery case, implosive, non-destructive collapse, infinite compression, origin of gravity, alphabets, life force, etc., how implosion sorts. Ah, yes. And this is just an old familiar slide. We were talking about Victor Schauberger earlier. So this is why actually Jonathan and Dolly at Implosion Research Lab in Plymouth, UK, I was there, they use a flat 50,000 RPM impeller at the bottom. The inside of the high dielectric egg, certain ceramics are good for that. The inside should be coated with, a silver or gold is very good, a thin layer, very smooth. And then that vortex needs to be piezoelectrically doped, which is to say, like Steiner biodynamic preparation, a rock powder, a little bit of very fine quartz powder, so it's piezoelectric. Now, when that vortex gets going at the right angle, the voltage you pick up between the centripetal and centrifugal point, that difference between compression and rarefaction is named voltage. And you will then begin to get electric power from gravity at the moment that vortex spontaneously begins getting colder. That's Victor Schauberger in essence. And the reason it gets the voltage from gravity is because it's cohering the vacuum. So this is an example. If you get more centripetal than the vacuum around you, that is vacuum coherence as archetype, which is literally the only ultimate definition of all zero-point energy devices. And we will have more on that from implosiongroup.com very soon. Many partners on those projects are cooking. Self-similarity, perfect charge. Yes, and the end of this show was just to show you, here was the geometric basis for the periodicity of the elements. Remember when we were saying with Mark earlier that electron shells are just fractal to their nucleus, and that implosion charge collapse is the ratio between the proton and electron on the proton-electron mass, and there's a net difference there, which we're going to show is gravity in the upcoming presentations with Mark Rohrbaugh. So here is the Platonic solid nest, tetracube dodecaecosa, which is the Star Mother kit, right here. And this is, of course, Galileo early model of the solar system, which is a Platonic nest. Now, if we look at the arrangement of the neutrons, I'm sorry, the protons and neutrons, the nuclear hadrons, the arrangement of the nucleus of the entire atomic table in the famous work of chemist Moon, University of Chicago, sure enough, the geometry of the hadrons in the nucleus is tetra, cube, octa, ecosa. So basically, this stellated collapse is how you nest hadrons, nucleus, protons, and neutrons in the nucleus. It's Platonic nesting. Now, that was the nucleus, is a Platonic nest. Now, here is the electrons. Remember, all electrons are simply suborbitals nested, interdigitated. So the SPDF suborbitals is the entire atomic table. The s suborbital, 2 electrons, 2 vortex, obviously is a torus, and there's the picture of the s suborbital, 2 vortex, a torus. The pi suborbital, 6 electrons, 3 vortex pair, obviously is a cube, and there's a picture from the physics literature, the cubic nature of the pi suborbital. And this is the psi perception of quark clairvoyant drawing of that long before current physics actually determined the pi suborbital is a cube, tetracube. And the DNF suborbitals, 10, 14 electrons, 5, 7 vortex pair, ecosa dodeca, Armand Weiler on the 5-7 spin symmetry pairs of the ecosa modeling atomic symmetry. So essentially, the electron shells are nesting in a Platonic array. Why? Because if you nest a cube in a dodeca and then a dodeca in an ecosa, and then recursively ecosa in a dodeca, you make only golden mean ratio. That's why you get phase conjugate implosive charge collapse. So a Platonic nesting is by definition golden mean ratio, which is by definition a phase conjugate implosive charge collapse. And that's how the electrons collapse non-destructively into the nucleus, and therefore how not just the atomic table is made, but how gravity is made, because there's a net difference in that amount of charge, which then produces the charge that got accelerated out through center longitudinally by phase conjugation through the speed of light. And the drain hole for charge out the center produces the phenomenon G ray of vita gravita. So this is another drawing of the SPDS suborbitals and that same tetracube octa. So that's actually an old slide. And this is how that was drawn in the original occult chemistry for the atomic table, the tetracube octa. He called it bars and stars, the DF subshell, and the bars and stars atomic elements are actually dodecaecosa. So basically, there's lots of drawings. Your chemistry teacher, if they had taught you how to visualize the atomic table geometrically by using simple Platonic nesting, all of chemistry would have then been revealed to you intuitively as non-destructive charge collapse, which is the definition of the word chem, as in chemistry. I will raise a chem, a shem. I will, chem, as in alchemy, chem, as in chemistry, means access to a black hole. And access to a black hole, the definition of alchemy and chemistry, is actually the implosive charge collapse. So you see the definition of chemistry and alchemy is actually fractal conjugation made implosive charge collapse. So making black holes, which is the definition of the chem and chemistry, is actually this, not just what Nassim was saying about protons, but actually the fractality of the atomic table in general. That's another picture. Finally, for completeness, at the end of this presentation, we included several slides about how DNA also gets implosive centripetal. So here you got this, remember that hydrogen bond, golden ratio, is at the center. Where's that? Let's see, I have a drawing of it here. I didn't get the hydrogen bond in here. Okay, but every ladder rung of the DNA, each of these ladder rungs is has a pent and then a hex and then a golden ratio rectangle at the center of every codon pair. That golden ratio rectangle at the center of every codon pair is a hydrogen bond. So the hydrogen bond is the zipper here, right here. That zipper at the center of every one of those bonds is a hydrogen bond. So you're lining up a fractal conjugate hydrogen bond in a long wave phase conjugator. Now, if you braid the braid of the braid on the braid, long wave nested on the short, here, and we proved that when you feel bliss in your heart, the EKG phonon, the long wave frequency sound of your heart, literally mechanically induces the DNA to do this braiding. Glenn Ryan did the measurement at my suggestion. We don't have a slide here. We don't need it. But so the recursive implosive braiding of DNA embeds the long wave on the short. You have massive broad spectral phase conjugate phonon implosion in DNA called, come on baby, light my fire, the wave mechanics of bliss. DNA gets centripetal, which is human bliss. So igniting your blood is the exact correct metaphor. Here we're talking about this in terms of Tantra and Celtic mythology. And then the DNA pilastrates, turns inside out, and you can actually see the DNA become toroidal. And here is the toroidal DNA modeled. It turns inside out. It does the dance of seven veils, the seven spins, the seventh seal. The seventh seal is actually the seventh spin of the tetra. And you unpack the seventh seal, you have all the mysteries of. And this is where we started about how your plasma gets big enough to steer the sun. So that's the end of the slideshow. And it is 9:30. And I have carried on as usual. So, two things here. One is there a storal to this Maury, a moral to the story, which is the big picture? Have we described the big picture, and do you have any questions? I have, I see that Lou DeBourbon has joined us from Santa Barbara. Welcome, Lou. So cool that you're here. Let me get Lou's website, octayoga.com, is what we developed with Lou DeBourbon, in which he showed that the actual kinesthetic of moving in these seven arrows, and you actually create this this geometry in your aura by actually spinning your glands, your chakras, your dantian, in these figure eight motions nested one inside the other, and you actually fabricate gravity inside your body. You actually teach your aura to implode with the Tai Chi of these figure eight motions of concentric symmetries, figure eights in the dantian. Very powerful work. Lou DeBourbon has joined us from Santa Barbara. Lou is getting so young over there. He must be almost 90 now. And his website we did together, octayoga.com. So glad you're here. We wish we had those pictures in front of us, but you can see it all at Octayoga. Okay, so we have questions here. Alexis said, how to practice stirring a tornado? Meditation, focus, out-of-body experience, contact visualization, else? Yes. No, so steering a tornado is, it's not just about looking for siddhis in psychokinesis, and it's not about ego. You know, ego has gotten a bad rap in psychological literature. Anybody that has a big ego is thought to be evil, but actually the opposite is the case. If you actually understand who you are and therefore your power to serve, you're entitled to a very large ego, because you identify. You take the phi and the dent, and then you implode. So if you identify with the needs of the sun or of Gaia, then your aura can be suitably large, and so you identify with something large which is in service, then that is a very large ego, and that's very, very warranted. And obviously the key here is to recognize that only service actually generates that implosion from the small to the large. So if your ability to serve is very large, then you deserve a very, very large ego. Thanks, Mark, for like President Trump. No, I joined the 33% of Americans who turned off CNN the day that Donald Trump got elected because it made me nauseated. But let's not go there, okay? But no, so Alexis's question is a very good one. What are the steps to steering a tornado? So actually, I would recommend the imagination. Supposing you're walking by a sacred mountain, and you know that that mountain has tremendous power, and you realize that At certain moments, you have thoughts that all your ancestors like. And at that moment, you feel your aura get big and your hair stand up. At that moment, you realize you could steer a tornado. So in effect, all of the beautiful charge in that mountain will jump into your body if you think the right thought, because you make that charge immortal. So basically, your ability to steer large tornadoes depends on your ability to have eureka moments, which is to say, to continuously be in the business of thinking only shareable thoughts, which is pretty much identical to say you're in the business of only considering pure principle. Another way of saying that is every day you had a life and there's 100 events in your day. But if at the end of that day you distill the pure principle from all the experiences of that day, then when you go to sleep at night and play your day backwards, you can do it without interruption, the ancient Gurdjieff technique. And that means you've digested the pure principle of that day and imploded it by perfect compression into the collective unconscious. And now you can have all the inertia of that collective unconscious, which is very powerful tornado steering. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Lisa's saying, if the Theraphi device is located in a room that is not particularly bioactive metal, will this diminish the effect of the Theraphi? Lisa, the Theraphi plasma, so powerfully self-aware, self-organizing, and healing, has a residual effect and can last for days, weeks, months, and grow and get bigger over time, and it even works when the gadget's off. However, that plasma field is identical to the powerful, known, proven healing effect of negative ion and negative ion wind. Negative ion wind and Theraphi plasma are the same. If there's a huge metal structure in a room, particularly if that metal structure has a little bias voltage on it, electrosmog, it's going to kill the negative ions and it's eventually going to kill the Theraphi plasma. Now, a small amount of metal in a room and a small amount of electromagnetism is normal. But if the room is predominantly made of biological material and only very small amounts of steel and aluminum, of course copper and gold is good, but then there's nothing to kill the negative ion and nothing to kill the plasma. So it's the same physics as living elementals, that the elemental forces are the same. When we took them in the city, they died. Why? Because the electronegativity is shorted out continuously by metal structures and electrosmog. So generally, the Theraphi does work better in a room made of living material. It's normal, as do your children. And this was the famous lady Joyce, who did this negative ion wind plasma therapy. It was called life force plasma. They used powerful negative ion winds, and they could remove nasty, even spine liquid infections from the body with massive negative ion winds. And she said, when she had all natural fabrics in the world working great, but if you got synthetic fibers and a bunch of metal in the room, negative ion wind doesn't work to heal. The same is true of Theraphi plasma. So you need generally an environment dominant with biological material and as little synthetic material. And Steiner was right. Children should only touch natural material. Children should never touch plastic and steel and synthetics. The reason is simple, because your aura cannot inhabit them, as with negative ion. So Heldon Stout is asking a question. To really learn all this on a deeper level, we would best recommend My Intuition Watch editions, get concepts. Well, fractalfield.com, if you go to our YouTube page, there's a couple hundred videos. If you search YouTube for Dan Winter, you get a few thousand. So, we made an attempt. And, our books are improving. The hygiene part of this we tried to teach in the book Implosion, Secret Science of Ecstasy and Mortality. And that book is in full in PDF in color, goldenmean.info/consciouskids. What changes in lifestyle should one make? A very appropriate question. It just means that you need to get very accustomed to being aware of the charge of your surroundings. For example, there are some lights in my environment that I always turn off because I know they mess with my aura. And there's like metal in a belt buckle and metal in my suspenders messes with my aura. You get very good at being aware of your aura. Jesus famously said, somebody just touched the robe of my hemp. And what he meant was, I felt my aura bleed. So you need to be aware when your aura is bleeding. It's critical to your survival. And it means light, natural fabric clothes, hemp, as really the best aura growth is when you have almost no clothes, if not no clothes, in an all biologic environment. That is the ideal. And obviously, biological environment is nature, where the ambient charge is fractal. So that's A. And 2 is then to learn the discipline of thinking only shareable thoughts. And the next, of course, is learn the diet of dominant life force, food, DNA that's happy, et cetera, et cetera. And lastly, of course, would be the yoga, the inner muscles that are built with the discipline. So there's a kinesthetic as well as for the hygiene, as well as the diet and environment and lifestyle. And it's not unlike how Jasmine teaches people to live without food. Michael said, thank you very much. Love, goodness, to implode or not to implode. That is a question. Thank you. Martin Hayem said, should I take seriously experience of telekinesis if I saw some? Get excited in that kind of situation? Would be a miracle worship, I guess. Well, you know, miracle worship is, you know, in religious tradition, miracle worship is dangerous because people who worship miracles generally become disempowered. And, you know, Course in Miracles was the exact opposite of the truth when they said there's no order of difficulty in miracles. They were actually saying you are not supposed to understand. And in my view, that was a sin to say that, because to say you are not supposed to understand means you could never be self-empowered, which means let God do this for you, which means outside yourself, which is the opposite of real self-empowerment. So no, we think that once you begin to recognize the psychokinesis in your environment, you understand the science behind it, that's a key empowering moment. And so you stop calling it miracles. For example, when I started realizing that my Kundalini was making rain, I was terrible at stopping the rain. I didn't say, oh, you know, I'm rolling thunder and I'm doing miracles on rain making. No, I said, oh, I understand that my aura was imploding, and that's the physics how water vapor becomes droplets. And for the same reason that you can put a hole in a cloud if you're a healthy kid standing in a mud puddle, because you make a centripetal force that causes water to precipitate and teaches the water vapor to become. And so that's a precipitation for not rainmakers, you know, magic. So it isn't about worshiping the miracle of rainmaking. It's about understanding the science to the point of self-empowerment. So, Martin, I would say, you know, experiencing telekinesis is a good start if you see the physics behind and learn to optimize the science from within by intention, as opposed to just seeking a miracle. Instead, what you're seeking is the increased ability to be of service. Norman, when you weave incessant intoxication in unknown days locked sewn in ceremonial pray. Well, I'm not sure I understand your question, Norman, but I would make the comment about intoxication here. Remember that the behavior that produces addiction, for example, alcohol, we learned that intoxication was actually a wrong turn on the right road to bliss. That actually, if you teach someone to make alpha in their brain waves, they won't want the next beer. And now we know why, because if you can make alpha from within, it turns the lights on inside when you close your eyes, and you don't need the beer to do it. The beer did it, the alcohol, by reducing oxygen in the brain, increasing conductivity, and making alpha more likely. However, if you learn to make alpha in a biofeedback neuron feedback training environment, the next drink of beer will make you feel sick because suddenly you found a better way to turn the lights on. The lights are the alpha beta, creates a harmonic cascade which implodes at plasma. That's why you see light inside your head instead of dark when you're able to make alpha the beginning of human bliss. So the urge for addiction was actually an appropriate urge because you knew unconsciously you needed access to some form of bliss process or you weren't going to get immortal. So if you teach any form of bliss activity to someone with addiction problems, the addiction will go away. And that can include not just neurofeedback for addiction, which is demonstrated over 50% sustainably successful, but any form of sustainable bliss process, Sufi dance, sacred circle dance, any kind of euphoria producing natural bliss process. And remember, we defined culture by saying, do you have the skill to teach your young people how to achieve bliss? Indigenous people knew how to do that. Western culture, we don't. So it is my view that in the West, people who say that culture is the color of your wine and your shoe polish, I say crap. I say culture is the ability to teach your young people how to have bliss, because that's the way they will get immortal. Okay, guys, unless there's any more questions, I think we had a fun night. My voice is losing. So the conclusion here would be, oh, well, one more question here. Halden, do you have any good teachers, resources, or students seem highly psychic? I'm from the line of Enki. Oh, yes. Oh, there's Lou saying, good to see you there. Well, actually, the psychic skill, for example, the sacred gymnastic, all of these things will increase the clairvoyance and others of those skills. And we know, for example, that Theraphi.net plasma is used systematically to increase clairvoyance. For example, in the medical intuitives working with it in Perpignan here, Theraphi.fr, Christine. So clearly, these psychic abilities are related to increasing your aura. So all of these hygienes for increasing aura definitely relates directly to becoming psychic. So I was going to conclude here just to say, by looking for what's next. Next week, Mark Rohrbach, the physics we introduced this evening, to another level as we introduce our upcoming physics papers to prove how fractality in particle collapse is gravity, centripetal force, and the origin of negentropy. Gravity is negentropic. The universe is negentropic. We are self-organizing, and now we know why. And the following week, we have Paul Harris doing beautiful work on our co-inventor for Theraphi.net and hands-on alchemy, and he will be talking about age reversal technologies and many things having to do with science and alchemy. And we have many exciting coming up. Teresa Burns on the Ophanum, and we have Alan Green talking again about John Dee and the Ryan's matter. Just a whole bunch of really great courses upcoming. So stay tuned here to Theraphi. Oh yes, I don't want to forget to mention Tufan Gulen from Turkey, who's part of the upcoming course series, Prague, Turkey, and South France course series, May and June this summer, fractalfield.com/2018. And most of the speakers for those events will be here with us at fractalu.com, introducing that beforehand. So thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for coming. Stay tuned. We will be sharing this video soon. Please come back and join us at fractalu.com. And bye, Lou de Bourbon. I hope I'm as active as you when I get as young as you are. I want to be a yogi too. Thanks a lot, guys. You take care. Hope to see you soon here at Fractal and in South France.